I was 20 years old. My girlfriend's mother, boy, I wish you guys could have met my girlfriend. She was the most beautiful, most amazing. But like many Gen Xers, I grew up in the shadow of a divorced home. Uh, Plenty of unsupervised time, little guidance on what it meant to be a man, and I knew I needed something. I knew something was missing, and I was working really hard trying to figure things out, and I was uh, uh, typical with guys like me who were. I don't know if you were undiagnosed ADHD as a kid, but most of us were, um, which is it's an interesting thing where it's nobody's fault because we just didn't know about ADHD, but we still suffered. Um, I love we live in a season now of awareness of mental health, and it allows us to be more loving and patient and nurturing. But when you grow up in an environment where you're undiagnosed, you're just called weird or lazy or different or spaz. Uh, if I name any more, I'll trigger. So, but um, but I was working really hard, trying really hard to do many things. I had two jobs. I was volunteering at church. I was serving in Young Life. I was dating this beautiful redhead. And I remember I went to her mom once and I said, I knew her mom loved me. I just always felt it, like she loved me. And I remember I was like fishing for affirmation, I think, because I went to her and I asked, you know, I said something to the effect of, I see a long term future with your daughter. How do you feel about that? Pretty confident she was going to say, you're so wonderful. I'm so glad she's with you. And she said, I'm concerned. You seem pretty aimless in life. And this is a thing that wasn't true, but it was her perception. I know now it's not true. Most men at 20 years old know the direction they're going to go with their life, and they're almost done with their degree to get there. Now, one, that's bad advice. That's wrong. But the next day, I was standing in an Army recruiting office because it hit me. There was a truth there that I was aimless. And instead of going in one direction, I was trying to go in all of them. And I felt empty. I lacked the ability to focus on things long term. And so I went into that recruiting station and I signed up to join the Army. That's a whole nother story of why I chose Army, and that's for later. But I, uh, I made one decision right then and there, which was a commitment. You had to sign a contract. It was a commitment, in a way, to wake up every day for the next 3 years, which is my enlistment term, 3 years to wake up every day to make other decisions that are going in the same direction. There were decisions of discipline, decisions of hard work, decisions of sacrifice. This scratched an itch inside of me that I felt because it was this uh, the conflict in the Middle East. There was Desert Shield, which was our first effort in Saudi Arabia, and I had friends that were in the military and who were going. I felt this sense of patriotism and obligation that I had to do my part, and realizing I only have this short window of time to do something for my country. That was part of it. So all these came together, and that might be why I joined the Army. I think if you ask anyone, why did you join the military? The honest answer is, I don't know. Like it seemed like the thing to do, and you're sure, but you're not sure, but then you do. You make the decision. And it's a binary decision that affects the rest of your life. I'm grateful for a lot of the things that I learned and I grew, and I proved to myself that I could do certain things that I didn't believe I could do. I also learned to say curse words in so many ways. So many. Um, so it wasn't perfect. But I do look back on it and go, yeah, that was a difficult time where I grew. But I didn't grow when I went to the recruiting station and signed the papers. I made a decision. The growth happened in all the little decisions I made for the next 3 years. To get up at 5 in the morning, to run on purpose. Right. Who does that? That's why God invented bikes and cars. The choice to persevere, the choice to serve others, the choice to commit to being unified with people that are completely different than you. That's the thing they teach you in the army. You have to be unified with people that you don't like. You have to be unified with people that insult you, that mock you. You have to share a mission with people that are different than you. You might be thinking, Pastor, great, that's a great story, but I never enlisted in the army. I'm never going to. I never had to shine my boots. Let me ask you this, though. Have you ever stood at a crossroads in your life knowing that your next step could change everything? You ever had that feeling like, okay, this is a decision? Could it be when you bought a ring for the first time and you got down on a knee? Not as scary as joining the military, but it probably should be. Maybe it's the time you enrolled for college and not knowing what it was going to be like, you just knew you wanted to accomplish this. And you didn't know what classes you were going to take. You knew it was going to be hard. You just didn't know all the specifics. But then you signed up and you had a goal. And so you did all those little decisions after the big one. You probably had decisions like that thrust upon you. You decide what happens when you get the phone call with terrible news. And your life changes. What direction are you going to go then? I've seen my kids face these decisions. When my daughter decided it's time for her to start a family, so she's going to step away from school. She finished 2 years. I'm so proud of her. And she said, now I'm starting a family, and she did. Now, every day and all throughout the night, she has little decisions to make because she made that big decision. And those are the decisions that shape her and help her grow. We've all had these moments. What we're going to look at today in Deuteronomy chapter 30 is what what Moses is pleading with the next generation. Last week, we looked at the first part of Deuteronomy chapter 30. If you don't have a Bible, Scott has them. He's going to hand them out here. Go ahead and raise your hand if you need a Bible. We're going to look at Deuteronomy chapter 30. We've been in this series where we're looking at the promises of God, and now we're at the end of the biblical exposition of all the promises of God. And then in a couple weeks, we got one more week after this where we're going to talk about eternity in heaven next week, which is really exciting. Like that, tell your friends. That's going to be one. That's a good one. Today is okay. Next week, that's going to be a good one. But we're looking at the promise of a new creation. It's been promised throughout the Old Testament and in the New that there is a new creation coming, a new heaven and a new earth. And last week we talked about the anticipation of that new heaven in the midst of suffering and in the midst of waiting. And now at verse 11 of chapter 30, let's just read together. We're going to go through this verse by verse, 11 through 20, and we're going to look at what is to say. Now, what I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. Okay, let's just stop there. That's verse 11. Now, what I'm commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. That word too difficult. The Hebrew is nifleth, and it could mean too difficult or too wonderful, too great. This is not bigger than you. This moment, this thing I'm going to present to you, and I presented to you before, it's not bigger than you. And if you remember what he presented before, right, what he's presenting here, you see in chapters 28 and 29 and the first part of 30 of Deuteronomy, he talks about what happens when you decide to obey God, when you decide to follow God with your life and live in his ways, there's blessings. And when you decide to not live in his ways, the result of that is called curses. It's already been mapped out that way. That's why God's call for us to live in him, it's universal for all of us. And sometimes when we're experiencing the consequences of our own actions, it's very easy for us to think that we're victims of suffering. We're having a hard time wrestling with accountability and responsibility. But the easy thing to put on is that I'm a victim. But that's not the way this is presented to us, this obedience to blessings and curses. It's presented to us of you're being invited in to God's kingdom to live in God's way. And a loving God has created it to where when you do that, it's a blessing. And because that's what's best for us, a loving God has created it to where when we don't do that, we're cursed. Because what are you motivated to do when you suffer? Change. Pain makes us change. What a loving God. If the goal and our purpose is to be in him, what a blessing it is that there is suffering when we're outside of that. So what he's saying is, I'm presenting this decision to you. It's a binary decision. I'm asking you, the next generation that's entering the promised land, think of the promised land as the promise of a new creation, new heaven and new earth. I'm presenting to you this binary choice to follow him. Now, inside of us, when we look at following him, inside of us is all these reasons as to why that's hard or why I can't, and I can't forgive that person, and I can't sacrifice this, and I can't serve this, and I can't give up that, and I can't do this. It seems beyond me. And Moses in this moment is saying, it is not beyond you. It is not beyond you. The choice before us is very clear and accessible. That's what he's saying. And then in verses 12 through 14, Moses talks about the nearness of God. You know how we've talked about the promises of God are getting closer to us and more personal as we start from the proto-evangelium till now. And Moses is emphasizing that, the nearness of God right here. It is not up in heaven. Right? What I'm commanding you today is not too difficult for you. It's not up in heaven so that you have to ask, who will ascend to heaven and to get it and proclaim it to us so that we may obey. You think about Moses. He went up to the burning bush, to the mountain, and he came down with the 10 commandments. He was the one that went up and came down and told them, here's what it is to live. He's saying it's no longer like that. Nor is it beyond the sea, so that you have to ask, who will cross the sea and get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? No, the word is very near you. It's in your mouth and in your heart, so you may obey it. This alludes to the ancient Near East concept of this divine revelation, where divine wisdom was thought to reside in the heavens or across the seas, and it was accessible only to the heroes and to the demigods. Like that was the only way to achieve this level of wisdom. And Moses is saying, it is not those things. It is right here. It is in your mouth. It is in your actions. You have the capacity to make this declaration today. You don't need anything else. You realize that? where you sit today, you don't need anything else to follow Jesus. You don't need to know more. You don't need to understand more. You don't have to go to college and get that degree to know the thing. You don't have to read the whole Bible. You don't have to understand comparative theology theories. Everything you have and you need to make this decision today is in you. It's in your mouth, means you can speak it right now. And it's in your heart. You can do it right now. What we get to say now, looking back on this, is Christ is near us. Jesus is with us and for us. He came. They looked forward to this, go, oh, I wonder what that's going to manifest like, but I can still make those decisions now because God is with me. We get to look back and go, Jesus came and he left the Holy Spirit. We have a much clearer picture of God's plan than they did back then. And they believed and they followed. We have way more information about God and his plan and Jesus, and we get to see thousands of years of God's plan playing out in human history. So the decision, the ability to do this is within us. And then it comes down to this in verses 15 through 18. See, I set before you today life and prosperity and death and destruction. He's making it very clear. Because think about where he's coming from. He's saying, my generation, we struggled with this. These are the things that we questioned. We questioned whether we were good enough to enter the promised land. We questioned whether we wanted to enter the promised land because the journey to the promised land was terrible. We questioned whether we trusted God. We questioned whether it was good to live in harmony with each other. We questioned whether we liked each other. There's a whole generation of people that lived in this confusion, thinking that this obedience to God to enter the promised land was beyond them or it was in the heavens. It was a mystery. And Moses is pleading with this next generation. It is not those things. It's for you. It's with you. It's in you. It's right now. This is a binary choice, a choice between life and death. And he says, I set before you life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him. There is no other way to love God than obedience. Moses isn't giving us any wiggle room here. Like, yeah, I love God, but I don't really want to do what he says. Then you don't love God. Like, there's no separating obedience and loving God. But if your heart turns away and you are not obedient, if you are drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, I declare you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. The path of disobedience is destruction. Like any good parent would warn their children, you keep touching that thing that's on fire and you'll get burned. This warning. What's interesting about this binary choice that Moses is presenting is we look back at that and go, man, that's harsh. But in their context, this is the first time they've been presented with a covenant from God where they even had a choice. Their ideas of these false gods was, there's a promise from a God and you better do it. But he's presenting this. You choose. You choose. But let me warn you, if you choose that path that you think is good, it's going to lead to destruction. The other gods, if you don't choose this thing, I'm going to demand that you sacrifice your children. That's when he says turn to other gods, that's the type of spiritual acts of worship that they would have been referring to. And so in a way, this is liberating and free. It's a choice that we face. Verses 19 and 20. This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Do you see how, like, Moses is getting very, very poignant. He's removing all of the excuses and the ways that humans go, I don't know, maybe later, right? First, he says, like, this is a binary choice and it's not beyond you. If you think you don't have the ability to make this choice, you're wrong. You have it right now. I'm going to call in witnesses to testify that you make this decision today. This is the signing of the recruitment papers. I'm going to step into the I don't know because I believe in what's beyond. And when you make that commitment, and this is the time when we come to Jesus and we say, I will follow you with my life. Man, I can't tell you how many times my relationship with God, I've had one of these crucible moments where I go, I am tired of playing Christian games. I'm tired of saying the right thing, doing the right thing, and then not caring if I don't obey. And just, I'm tired of doing the religious thing. And it's interesting in a church environment. We've been part of large churches where I get obsessed with working the church culture to become some type of something within this community of people, and has nothing to do with my intimacy and my closeness with God and my transformation. It's like I might as well have been part of an Elks Club trying to become an elk leader. I don't know what they are. Some type of club. I think of Fred Flintstone, the Grand Poobah. So he's setting this he says, I call the heavens and the earth. I'm removing all your excuses, all your past excuses. And by having witnesses, I'm removing all your future excuses. Now choose life. And here's why. So that you and your children may live. That word live is the fullness of life. You may experience the fullness of life. We're going to talk more about this next week, but when he's talking about that you may live, he's talking about what it means to live in eternity. Last week, we talked about the now and the not yet of this idea of eternity. The now and the not yet is this. When we talk about eternity, we often think of what happens when I die. We think of eternity as the thing that happens after I lose my consciousness on earth or whatever, after my body gives out. But there's a now about eternity. We don't know much about what is going to happen after we die. Just honestly, we don't know much. We can infer from hyperbole and story, and we just don't know. The Bible isn't very specific about that. But we do know at least there's a component about living in eternity now that we miss. How can we live in eternity now? If we are adopting the mind of Christ, living in the kingdom of heaven, we're living in an eternal mindset now. That says, today, I am part of today. I have decisions I make today that will affect eternity. The decisions I make today affect tomorrow. If you think about it, the only influence you have on your tomorrow is your decisions today. That's the only influence you have on your tomorrow. And if we live in today with an eternal mindset, we're not going to panic by short-term struggles. We're not going to freak out and overreact because our feelings are hurt in the moment, because we're able to trust in the Lord with eternity and react today with an eternal mindset. We're going to be able to say, okay, like Moses here, I have dedicated 40 years, a whole generation of my life to entering into the promised land, leading my people into the promised land. And he'll be told, you will not enter the promised land. Knowing that, what does he do? Does he stomp his feet and go, it's not fair, I gave my whole life to this. Moses, living in eternity now, said, I need to prepare the next generation because this mission is bigger than one man. This mission of God, calling his people unto himself to be his people on earth, to do his purposes on earth, is bigger than one person. And so he's pleading with the next generation, saying, please, he's also saying, like, look at the mistakes of our generation. And these are their children, right? So their children are very well aware of the mistakes the parents made, right? Children are very well aware. of the mistakes of parents. And he's still telling them, don't do what we did. You trust, you obey. I'm removing all the excuses that my generation had from you. And I'm saying right now, this is your choice. And it's binary. The big thing I want you to remember today is that today's choices are our only influence on tomorrow. Think about that. If you want to shape what your future looks like, it starts with your choices today. And I think we can bring that to today. Verses 19 and 20. This day I call the heavens and the earth to witness against you that set life before you. Now choose life so that you and your children may love the Lord your God, listen to his voice, and hold fast to him, for the Lord is your life. What does it mean to love the Lord, your God? Moses says, listen to his voice and hold fast to him, for the Lord is your life. 2 Corinthians 5:17, Paul says it like this. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation is come, the old is gone, the new is here. That's the promise of making a decision to follow Christ, is that there is a new creation. You are free to let go of your past. You're free to look forward to the future. And I have a question. Do you have the courage right now to choose joy in the midst of suffering? To choose hope in the midst of regret? To choose healing while feeling pain? Because we have this weird feeling of obligation to our suffering, that we owe it some type of respect. We owe it some type of lingering in it. But I call you to this day, right now. Do you choose? Do you have the courage to choose, to step into the unknown of what's next, to say, I choose hope. I choose joy. And like a marriage proposal or an enlistment contract, you don't know what that means every day, but it's a commitment to a direction. And it's those little decisions. And if you remember what we said a couple weeks ago, in those decisions, God has built in the fact that you are going to make the wrong decisions along the way. This isn't a call to perfection. It's a call to march in the perfect direction. And along the way, you're going to live a flawed faithfulness. And God has built in his grace because there's always a path back with repentance and restoration and forgiveness. This is the God we serve. That's what it means to live in the now of eternity. I haven't come up with a great way to say this. I probably will by next week, but there's an element here that I was thinking about is whatever decision you make today, you are either sacrificing something short term for the sake of something eternal, or you're sacrificing something eternal for the sake of something short term. Every decision is that binary choice. Are you going to indulge in this now and pay for it later? Are you going to pay for something now to help you tomorrow? Right? Mike, are you going to go back for the third time to the buffet today, right now, and pay for it tomorrow? I have gluten and dairy issues. Like, Mike, are you going to eat the mac and cheese now? Sometimes. But it's very true. Today's choices are our only influence on our tomorrow. The way that looks at, like spiritually, will you choose to forgive instead of holding a grudge? Will you let go of the grudge? When you do that, you're choosing life. Will you choose to sacrifice and give generously to a cause you believe in? Instead of hoarding? When you do that, you're choosing blessing. Will you choose to speak truth in love instead of lash out in anger and selfishness? or equally selfish, remain silent. When you do that, you're choosing obedience. Every day, in big and small ways, you're making decisions to either align yourself with the kingdom of God or you're setting yourself up for suffering later. This is what Moses is presenting. Just imagine the emotion he must feel, the love he has for this next generation, the sacrifices they have made. So, what does this look like for us? Think about that. I want to, if today's choices are our only influence for tomorrow, what if you were to choose today to identify one thing where there is an act of obedience to God's ways and God's will? And are you going to trust him and sacrifice the thing today for the sake of a hope for tomorrow? What's the one thing? For some, it's as simple as taking care of your physical body. So I am going to do the thing. Join a gym. That's a step. But remember, I learn this every January, joining a gym doesn't get you in shape, right? It's the commitment to a program. It's the commitment to people. It's having witnesses around you that you know you're accountable to. You take that step. I'm going to eat better. Are you? If you're committing to eat better, the first step, get rid of the junk food in your house. There's the physical, that's physical health. Emotional health, I'm going to go to a therapist. Well, I'm asking you today, all excuses are gone. Your phone is in front of you today. You can call today to schedule an appointment. That's the binary choice. And when you start seeing a therapist, you're going to have these little decisions to make at every meeting where you're going to say, am I going to talk about those things? But it doesn't start until you make that choice. Maybe your choice is you need to forgive someone. And this is where people get it backwards. You know how to forgive someone? You know how it starts? It starts with a bold declaration when you go up to somebody and you say, I forgive you. Then, every day, you will have small choices to make to live in that promise of forgiveness. If you wait for the feeling of forgiveness to come to you before you declare forgiveness, you will never get there. It starts with that bold. And so don't think like I have to have a miracle from God for me to forgive someone, or I have to really understand and study forgiveness before I do it. It's not beyond the heavens. It's not across the seas. Your ability to do that, move that direction is with you and in you right now. Make the bold declaration in front of a cloud of witnesses, and then take those steps. These are just some practical ways for us to live out what Moses is telling this next generation. This is what it means for us to live in the now of eternity. And the promises of eternity we can experience now. And when we get weary, we can remember there's still a not yet to come. Because we're going to do our best. But the Bible promises that Jesus is coming again. And he's going to take it the rest of the way. Our job is to be faithful in the now. Carrying the weight of that binary decision, your only influence on tomorrow are the decisions you make today. That puts urgency to it, doesn't it? Imagine what our church is going to look like, because this is kind of the way we're operating. We made a bold decision to start a food pantry. We signed the contracts. I don't know what that's going to look like. We sure don't have the money. We barely have space that kind of serves as a food pantry. But man, every day We've made choices to continue to serve. 178 people last month, and then this month we've had a flood of more. But we had to make that bold step, and now we're living in this abundance of serving others. And here's what's been abundant. Us as a church, our continuous call to sacrifice has been abundant. Earthly possessions have not become abundant. Money, space have not become abundant. We're still making daily sacrifices for that, which we don't regret. We count it as a blessing. We've been able to prove to ourselves over and over and over again, we're committed to this decision that we made. Imagine what else we could do if all of us, came together and made sacrifices like that for the sake of being a light and a testimony to our neighbors and our world about the goodness of God in practical, tangible ways that they can understand. Because you know what we're communicating to those people, no matter where they are in their faith? That hope, it's not beyond you. Hope isn't in the heavens. Hope isn't across the seas. Hope is right here in God's people right now. And that's us. We get to do that together, church. Let's do that. The way we are going to be the most impactful expression of God's people is when you and I deeply commit to being impactful expressions of God's persons. Our strength as a group comes from our individual strengths as our members. So the call is clear and it's always personal. Will you choose to make a big commitment to follow God? Wherever you are in your faith. I don't know where all of you are. I know where a lot of you are. You're in a good place, and I'm proud of you. You're making good choices. And some of you are dealing with the tough consequences of making a big, bold choice in the past, and you're struggling. But remember, God's with you, and you're not alone, and you've got a whole church of people who are doing the same thing. I had a friend remind me of that this morning. He said, not only do I need you, brother, but you need me. Oh, yeah. So let's be the church.